So I think we can start.
I think so, yeah.
Yes, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here this morning for our event, for our webinar on global value chains and social policies, insights from EU research. And these are insights generated in three sister projects, three EU Horizon Europe funded projects on global value chains. My name is Holger Görg. I'm from the Kiel Institute for the World Economy in Germany, and I'm the scientific coordinator of one of the projects, ReThink GSC. And I'm also very happy to welcome you on behalf of my co-hosts, if you will, or my co-scientific coordinators, Roberta Capello of Twin Seeds Project, and Rosanna Fornaciero of the ReSChape project. So what we want to do today is to present and discuss some of our findings that we've generated in the last while. These projects have been running for about 2 years. We want to briefly look at these results and discuss them with stakeholders and discuss them with you. So we're happy, very happy to take questions. So the way we've structured this is we will have a presentation by one of our researchers for about 10-15 minutes, then a reply or a discussion from a stakeholder related to the project for another few minutes, and then we'll have time for project-specific questions related to the presentation. And then once we've gone, we'll do this for these three projects, and then we'll have some time at the very end to come back to some general questions. Okay, could I maybe all the participants ask you to mute your mics while others are presenting, and then raise your hand for questions or put them also in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on the chat. So I think that's all from my side. I think we might as well start the proceedings, and we'll start the proceedings with the project Twin Seed, and Roberta Capello is going to present us some of her work, which will then be discussed by Victor Stolzenberg of the WTO. Roberta, over to you. Thank you.
We don't hear you, Roberta.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Right, can you see the slide? No, not yet, yeah?
No, not at the moment.
Can you see the slides?
Yeah, now we can see the slides.
Now you can see that, okay.
Maybe can you put it on full screen?
No, doesn't work. Here we are, sorry. I'm trying to find... Questa, no? Sì. Oh, okay, here we are. Can you see it?
Yes. Yep, perfect.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. So thank you, Holger, for the introduction, and thank you for being also on our side. As I told you, as Holger told you, we are going to present shortly some of the results. You can imagine in 2 years we have a lot of results, so we had to choose some of them, a very, very short net stop of what we got, and then ask some stakeholders to comment on them. So we are in Twin Seeds, we decided to look at the impact of the reorganization of global value chains on regional employment dynamics and income inequality. This is the structure of the consortium, just to let you know that we are quite a number of researchers, very good researchers. I'm really proud of the results that we are getting and the way in which the seriousness with which we are working together in a very cooperative and very nice atmosphere. So the issue, as I told you, is to try to disentangle a little bit the relationship between reorganization of JVCs and employment dynamics. Why that? Because there are a lot of policy issues going on that are becoming even more important nowadays than when we started the project, because we have, as we all know, conflicts and that in Europe and situations in Europe in the world, then that bring Europe to rethink about its trade relationships and try to be a little bit more independent from other countries, other outside countries, extra EU countries, in terms of critical raw materials and important intermediate goods. So all these is also related to the idea that the EU has since 2021 about the idea of the importance of reindustrializing a little bit Europe in order to relaunch productivity slowdown, as also the Draghi report stressed quite recently. So in all these policy reorganization and new policy strategies, what we try to see is whether reshoring and the reindustrialization bring to new jobs and to which kind of jobs and which are the consequences of these reshorings and this creation of new jobs in terms of income inequalities. All this is, we are not the first to analyze this, but these are still open questions that need to be clarified much more than they have been up to now. So we add a perspective here in the presentation. We decided to give you one of the perspectives in which we analyze this relationship, and in particular, strengthening the regional perspective. Our impression is that behind a national behavior, there are very different situations, local situations that can help in understanding this relationship. And again, this is not the only one perspective that we have seen, but this is the one that we decided to present today. And we decided to look at the impact of reshoring, or in general, in different forms with which it can take place, and its effect on regional employment dynamics. So one of the main results that comes out is that reshoring per se, so looking at the fact that some of the production that was previously offshored to extra EU country, if it is brought back, does not immediately lead to manufacturing employment growth on average in Europe. Instead, it becomes much clearer when we analyze this for specific context, regional context. Let me give you some hints on the results. First of all, if we divide our European region into traditionally manufacturing backshoring regions, or regions where you bring back production that was previously offshored, and these regions were strong manufacturing regions in Europe, you have a premium in terms of jobs. And in particular, we tried to quantify that. It's not particularly strong, but it's there. And it's 0.4% of employment increase per year, more in traditional manufacturing regions than in other regions. So this means around 120,000 additional jobs in these regions. Instead, if we look at regions where we have a kind of backshoring, but these are emerging manufacturing regions, so they were previously not so strongly specialized in manufacturing activities, this premium is not there. And in other words, they even grow less than. It doesn't mean that they have a negative growth rate, but they grow less in terms of manufacturing jobs than the other regions. And this could be related, which is something that we use to explain this on the level of automation that these regions have. Moving to reshoring, we have reshoring regions that again have a 1.5% premium in employment with respect to the others. That can be expansionary GDC regions or other regions. And this premium is particularly related to low-skilled manufacturing employment growth rather than to high-skilled ones that is concentrated where you expand JVCs. Just briefly on instead some hints on income inequalities at the regional level. And here again, we moved to another type of reshoring, which is what is called nearshoring. So we divided the regions according to the home regions, nearshoring regions, as we call them, that are those that host the headquarters of firms that decide to nearshore in Europe, which means bringing back production that was previously sent out of their region outside Europe. Now they bring that back to other European regions, and they nearshore their production activities. And then we define the host regions that are those that host the production of the home nearshoring regions. And looking at that, we see that all regions that are host nearshoring regions, so that host the production that comes back in reshoring periods, grow more. So they have a kind of growth premium. Why this is a little bit different in terms of the reasons why they bring back and the low labor cost regions are those that gain the most, while the others are less, are gaining less. But in terms of income inequalities, and this is the last message that I would like to give, is that we have, this is a measure of the income inequalities among in Europe as a whole in light red. In red we have the income inequalities within countries, and in blue we have among countries, European countries. And as you see, nearshoring exacerbates regional disparities, and it can be a little bit different in other situations, but this drives us to policy implications, which is in general that we need to have a region-specific and nuanced policy approaches to mitigate the adverse impacts of JVC's reorganization, while promoting sustainable economic growth and inclusive labor market outcomes. This message leads to the following policy implication, according to us, that are, first of all, trade policies and all the open strategic autonomy, new policy that we are new trade policies we are speaking about in Europe, have to be accompanied by place-based local policies, reinforcing the scarce assets and the innovative capacity and the quality of the produced goods of each area. Instead, I'm going to social policies have to be tailored to the needs of the regions, exempli grazia, through high-skilled versus low-skilled job markets actions in different regions. And last but not least, all regional development policies, so the structural policies, have to be designed according to different locational advantages regions have in hosting production brought back. So there is, according to us, an important general policy message that it is that different types of policies, trade policies, social policies, structural policies, they have to be, let's say, linked together and achieve their own, in order to achieve their own goals. So this is really a very, very short of what you can find in Twin Seeds, and this is our website. So all these and much more can be found in our website. And I thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberta. Really interesting, fascinating work. Now we have Victor Stolzenberg from the WTO to discuss this a bit and give us his views. And may I just remind everyone, please, if you're not presenting, please mute your microphone to avoid any disturbances. Thank you. Victor, over to you.
Thank you, Holger. Let me go on full screen. Well, let me share my screen. Can you see the slides?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so first of all, thank you for the invitation. We're very glad to participate in the workshop, and we're able to get a first glance at these incredibly rich results that the different work streams and projects have generated, and in particular the Twin Seeds project. So yes, thanks for the invitation and for sharing the results with us. So I will give a few comments. First, I will just try to highlight what we think is the main contribution. And then I will kind of have a wish list, because there are so many rich and great results, but of course there's always more things that can be done. So I will maybe give a few suggestions for next steps. As usual, the disclaimer applies for interventions by Secretariat staff, that these are personal opinions and not the opinions of the organization. Yeah, so in terms of findings, the project shows which is very important, that reindustrialization hopes linked to re- or nearshoring trends in the EU should be somewhat modest, right? The results that Roberta just showed indicate that so far, at least, they haven't observed huge reindustrialization trends. The manufacturing employment growth continues to fall in most developed regions, and this seems to be, it doesn't seem like reshoring or nearshoring is going to stop that trend. Moreover, it could raise regional inequality, and it also seems to be that the policies in place right now are not necessarily targeted to the re- or nearshoring policies in terms of adapting to the regional conditions. And we think all of these results are incredibly critical in particular right now, because the regional employment effects of trade and GVCs continue to be an understudied field, in our opinion, in particular with respect to reshoring, right? There's a large and rich local labor market literature, but even though this literature is treating regions as a unit of analysis, its focus and shifts still to sectoral or aggregate effects. While what we do see, for instance, now with the US elections, of course, that regional effects of trade policies, of policies in general, are key for many outcomes. For instance, because the political systems in the US, but also in the EU, are often targeted at regions. So it's I want to congratulate the whole team in contributing to this literature and really keeping the focus on the regional effects. Now, having said that, I think there's a lot of additional things that I think we need to keep in mind. There are also a couple of caveats. I think the most obvious one is that, of course, re- and nearshoring is still somewhat limited in the data to see on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's also hard to measure, right? It's not that we have agreed measures of what is reshoring, what is not. It's very hard to see that we have a particular firm and we know that this firm offshored and then reshored the same production task, which is, I suppose, reshoring in the most conservative definition. And depending on then how you measure it, you will find a lot of papers. There's recent work of my colleagues here at the WTO, which say that we do not see any signs of generalized reshoring or regionalization in the world economy. So it very much depends on the trends. And given that much of the data doesn't really indicate broad reshoring yet, this might partially explain also the absence of findings in terms of manufacturing employment. Then another caveat is, of course, that a lot of the focus in the project was on what you might want to call partial equilibrium effects, right? But of course, for policymakers, it's important to keep a broad view also on other effects. What's the impact on nearshoring on downstream sectors, and that's linked to the second point here, that it may hurt final consumers because it increases prices, right? Like if reshoring is towards regions, or nearshoring is towards regions with higher wages or with higher production costs, it's going to increase the costs for downstream sectors, for final consumers. So we might have employment going down in these sectors. And that's very important to keep in mind, right? So what are the net benefits? What are the net welfare effects? Also in other sectors, of course. What about services employment in the region? What about overall employment? Is in some of the regions where we do see at least relatively positive effects with respect to the other regions, did this increase employment overall, or was it just a shift of employment across sectors? And we do know that there is an interest of policymakers to have an increase in manufacturing employment, but still from a net, it would be interesting to see a little bit what are the net welfare consequences of this. And then in terms of next steps, I think what would be very interesting to know is also, given that there are different causes and drivers of nearshoring, on the one hand, we have structural drivers, such as rising wages in offshore locations in China, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Mexico, wages are catching up, and that might, in a way, structurally give firms less of an incentive to offshore, or at least to bring stuff home. There are other structural drivers, such as technological change, that makes it cheaper to produce in advanced economies. And insofar as these are likely to increase costs less, so they might have different effects than policy-induced reshoring. So potentially in next steps, one could try to differentiate between sectors where we, for instance, have seen increases in tariffs, or in bilateral relationships where we have seen increases in tariffs, as opposed to other bilateral relationships, or in other sectors where we haven't seen this, to identify whether certain policies that are likely to have larger cost implications also have different effects in terms of reshoring than others. And also, and my last remark is on the policy recommendations. I think sometimes there we need to push researchers to be a little bit more specific, because the general recommendations do make sense. We do need more place-based policies and more targeted social policies. But when it comes to really, okay, what is the tool we should be using? There, it's very hard for policymakers to take this from academia to know. I mean, there are some papers, and the problem often there is that evidence on some place-based policies is positive, on others is negative, but it's also not consistent. So to maybe in a future project study a little bit more, okay, which policies are the right policies for certain areas. And I know this is incredibly hard, but of course that would be incredibly useful as well going forward. But yeah, so let me conclude once more to congratulate everyone on the project. It's really great, it's really insightful, and we are really glad that we are able to see the results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor, for your insights. It's really, really interesting to get your opinion, and of course, being more specific in terms of policy is always something that we academics should think harder about, perhaps. Yeah, so thanks a lot. Roberta, do you want to reply to some of the comments immediately, and then maybe people can start raising their hands or write in the chat?
I would just thank Victor, because I totally agree that there is still a lot to do, and he gave us some hints on how to go on, and we will for sure try to do that. And I fully agree. Policy implication, even if you have to well, we are dealing with policies in the third year, so we might come up with something a little bit more concrete, but as Holger said, this is something that academicians are a little bit weak, but we have also our scientific board and also the stakeholders that can help us in this respect. Otherwise, I agree for the future research activities and suggestions that you gave us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roberta. So now we have some time for questions discussion. If there are any questions, points of discussion, maybe I could start with one and asking you, Roberta, maybe for a bit more information. I found it quite interesting, and it was really at the beginning when you divided regions into emerging manufacturing, backshoring regions, and traditionally, and you had these different developments for these. Could you give me an example or a hint of what type? So, what regions are we talking about? Is the north of Germany a traditionally manufacturing backshoring region or an emerging region? Or where are the emerging regions? Do you know? Can you give some specific examples?
Yeah, I should look at the map. We have a map of these emerging regions and the map of traditionally industrial regions. For example, it's easier for me to remember about Italy. We have what we call the third Italy, so the regions that are strongly based on made in Italy, and especially on very specialized, sectoral specialized activities like the textile industry or these types of traditional sectoral activities that are in this type of field, in this type of category of traditional manufacturing regions. And this is because we measure them, that's the point, we measure them as regions that were already specialized in manufacturing when they offshored, and they are still and they are increasing their manufacturing specialization, bringing back their activities from outside. While the emerging regions, they were not specialized, but they are increasing their manufacturing specializations because of the increase in domestic value added that they have from reshoring. So this is the difference. So regions like Emilia-Romagna, like Veneto, they are part of this category, of the first category, while emerging regions are, and this is interesting and explains also the effect. The traditional manufacturing regions are, most of them are in Western countries. So they are where we had an industrial vocation there. And this is where we bring back and we rebuild the industrial knowledge that we had there, because this is a fear of JVCs, of offshoring, that we were going to lose our industrial knowledge. And it seems that with the reshoring, at least with the data we have to rely on the data we have. And this is something that we can still relaunch in Europe. So we are still in a moment where we can bring production back, and we restructure and we strengthen our traditional industrial knowledge, which is a very, from my point of view, it's an extremely important policy message. Okay, thank you, Jorge. Jorge.
Thanks, Roberta. Perfect. We have a few more minutes for some questions, discussion. If there are any, I don't see any hands raised. Oh, yeah. Bernhard Dux, please go ahead.
Yeah, good morning. Hello. Just one comment on Victor's comments. I think that there may be some unobserved reshoring in Europe. At least this is my impression from the interviews we did in Twin Seats, because we found many firms which should have done reshoring, what we read in the press, but they don't want to talk about it. It seems to be that this is a kind of failure in their eyes. So I'm really puzzled about what you said. I think there should be more reshoring, but maybe it's just too early to see, and it will evolve over time.
Thanks. Maybe I can add to this, Victor. At the WTO, is there an accepted definition of what reshoring exactly is? I mean, you had one definition that was very, very strict, right? To essentially taking back production of the same product, if I recall correctly. Is that what you work with at the WTO, or are there different definitions? Or
no, we don't have. So it's also not something that is like very much discussed here as a concept itself, right? These are national policies to some extent, but it's not something you would require international cooperation for. Quite the opposite. No, so for instance, my colleagues, they used a much more simple definition, which is a share of extra regional imports, and the change in this. So if there's an increase in intra-regional sourcing, then that's considered nearshoring, and there they didn't see a huge that share hasn't picked up a lot on average, in particular not in the EU or in the US. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Just having a quick look at the pictures here. I don't see any hands raised. So if there aren't any more questions, as I said, we will have time at the end probably to come back to a more general discussion. So thanks again, Roberta and Victor, for kicking off this webinar, and thanks for the insights, thanks for the results, really fascinating work. And we now move on to the second presentation, which is related to the ReThink GSC project. And we'll have Alexandra Partaker give a brief overview of some results, and then Nicola Brandt from the OECD sharing her views on this work with us. Okay, Alexandra, over to you.
Yes, hello. Excuse me, I'm a little bit ill, but I think I'll handle. So, hello, everybody. Can you please confirm whether you can hear me well and see the slides?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is a different topic because in this work we've looked at knowledge creation that is done by European universities. In particular, we've analyzed the patenting activity of European higher education institutions. So I'm going to show you some of the evidence and some policy implications that we have formulated. All of this evidence that I'm showing here is part of the project that we've developed within the ReThink GSC, and the work has been done by the team from Gdańsk University of Technology, and the working paper and the details are here below. So what we are trying to show is kind of a new evidence on university patenting in Europe. We believe it is a new evidence because we have generated micro-level data set that shows us precise information about patents and also links this patenting activity with the characteristics of university units from more than 30 European countries. So we can show some new stylist facts and also formulate some policy lessons that I'm going to talk about at the end of this presentation. So we start from the observation that patents can give us really good information about what is going on in terms of knowledge creation. In particular, there's really a rich literature on knowledge that's created either by firms or by universities and other research institutions. And sometimes, of course, this can be done jointly. So we have the so-called third mission of universities and the link between academic world and industry, and that's something that policymakers would like to see very much. So patenting activity is basically used as a proxy for innovation and new knowledge creation. But if we have a look at the data, it seems to be quite a challenging issue because, for instance, European Patenting Office reports that only 7% of, excuse me, of all European patents were actually filed by universities. So the patenting activity of academic institutions seems to be quite weak. At least this is something that we see in the patent data. Not many patents are filed jointly by firms and universities, also around 7% of all patents. And in our data set, we find out that over 70% of all the European universities that we've analyzed do not report direct patents at all. What I mean by direct patents, these are patents that can be attributed to university as an institution. Of course, there are scientists, professors that generate patents, and they publish patents, they apply for patents under their own name. So this is something that we cannot see in the statistics. Looking at global rankings, major patenting institutions, academic institutions come from the USA, lots of them from China, and just 2 from Europe. So this also shows us that we have lots to be done, yes, in terms of academic patenting. And this has been tackled quite a lot in the policy debate. So we've discussed the so-called European university paradox in the past and at present. I think the topic links also very well to the new report on European competitiveness, the so-called Draghi report that was published in September this year. So what we've done, we've analyzed patent applications that are recorded in the global patent database. Overall, we have analyzed the sample of almost 900 patenting universities from Europe and over 2,100 non-patenting ones. So this is the map that shows you the patenting universities. They come from all over Europe, but the distribution is not equal at all. So most of the universities that actually generate patents come from Germany. It's 19% of all the universities that we've analyzed, from France, from the UK. If we match the map of patenting institutions with those that do not generate patented knowledge, you see that they are also spread all over Europe. But as we'll see in a moment, the concentration is extremely strong. In terms of the time trends, the number of academic patents coming from European countries, European universities, have risen. And this trend is observed especially since 2000 onwards. This drop that you observe in terms of granted patents is just the artifact of the data, because it takes time to get a patent granted. So it doesn't mean that we have less patents, but we just need time to be granted. Looking at the data, we recover really strong concentration. At the country level, UK leads in terms of university patenting. Then we have Germany, France, Switzerland, Belgium. So these are well-developed European countries. But even more striking evidence comes when we have a look at top universities. So those that have the biggest number of patents. Here you see 2 maps. The map on the left, the one with the red dots, shows you top universities, top European universities in terms of all patent applications, and the blue dots on the right-hand side show you top universities in terms of granted patents. So we see that there's a strong concentration, geographical concentration of these top universities. They come mainly from the UK, from Benelux countries, from France, from Germany. Western Europe leads, yes, in this ranking, and Central and Eastern Europe, Southern European universities play really a minor role. Well, it's not surprising to see that among the top universities we'll find the University of Oxford, University College of London, ETH from Switzerland, and so on. So these are those top scientific institutions in Europe, but they seem to be also the top ones in terms of the patenting activity. The distribution of patents across European universities is extremely uneven. If we have a look at the whole sample, we see that 45% of all the universities that we've analyzed have just reported 1 to 10 patents. And on the other extreme, we'll find institutions that have registered more than 500 patents in this whole analyzed period of time, and they correspond to just 2% of all the higher education institutions in Europe. In terms of the number, you have here the data. So we have just these 19 top institutions that patent the most. Looking at the geographical distribution, our data set allows us to match patenting activity of universities with regional characteristics. And this is the map that shows you which regions are the most effective, let's say, in terms of academic patenting. So the ones that are in red are the strongest in terms of the number of academic patents since 1980 onwards. So again, here we see a strong geographical concentration. And if we map it with the data on GDP per capita, there's also a strong correlation. We can have a look at single countries. So we have analyzed the within country distribution of university patents. So here you have the example of Germany. Again, the regions in red are those that in the data show us the major number of academic patents. So unsurprisingly, these are institutions coming mainly from Western and Southern Germany. But looking even deeper in the data, we can actually see the actual locations of these universities. And sometimes a region appears to be strong in patenting activity, but it turns out that this is responsible, this can be attributed just to a few institutions that are highly concentrated in terms of localization. And similar pattern can be seen in the case of other countries. So here you have the example of France. We have analyzed the UK, Italy, and other also countries as well that I'm not showing here. The data set that we've managed to create also gives us some insights about the characteristics of institutions. And I think this is an important aspect because then we can really understand why some of the universities are better in terms of generating patents. So comparing patenting and non-patenting universities, we see that those that do patent are typically older, they are bigger in terms of the number of students and number of academic staff. They also have lower teaching load, and they are richer. Yes, they are richer in terms of total revenues that they get, but they also have different structure of funding. They have, for instance, bigger share of revenues coming from so-called third-party revenues. So these are revenues from projects, from some external funding, not coming from the central budget. This is a slide that I think could be quite interesting from the policy perspective. We have recently also analyzed the relationship between patenting activity of universities and their participation in EU projects, research projects. So the correlation is really strong. Those universities that have participated in many EU-funded projects, they also generate lots of patent applications. It doesn't mean that participation in EU projects automatically leads to generating patents, but the strong universities do everything. They publish a lot, they participate in EU projects, they generate patents. Yeah, so we have a very strong clustering of research activity. And these features of top universities are very strongly interrelated. A similar pattern appears when we have a look at the coordination of EU projects. And you see here some of the top units, so University of Oxford, UCL, University of Lausanne, and so on. So this evidence, I think, leads us to some quite interesting policy lessons. So first of all, we have, let's say, delivered the data that can be used to generate decisions that are really data-driven. So this especially this micro level aspect of the data set. So this can lead us to more targeted investment, to more tailored support programs. But the challenge that to us seems to be the biggest one is the one that is related to regional disparities. And this is a strong policy dilemma, whether we should support concentration of, for instance, funds in the best units, that would lead to even further concentration because the part dependence is very strong here? Or should we focus on cohesion? Yeah, so the topic that is very much present in EU policies. I do not have an answer to this dilemma, so this is something that I'd like to discuss with you. Then another issue is the collaboration between academia and industry. For sure, it requires stimulation. There's been much research about so-called local entrepreneurial ecosystems. So the links that universities have with firms, companies, entrepreneurs coming from their regions, their locations, this could boost collaboration between academia and industry and the transfer of knowledge from academia and industry. And this, on this ground, for sure, Europe has much to do. For instance, comparing to what's going on in the United States. And finally, research funding strategies, yes, how to optimize them. So the data that we have allows us also to evaluate the efficiency of publicly funded research projects. But this aspect also goes back to this extreme concentration, yes? Whether we should support the strongest, the most effective, the best in terms of research, European universities, or rather focus on more equal distribution of funding. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Really interesting stuff. And of course, maybe I should have mentioned that in Rethink GSC, we focus a lot on also the relationship between knowledge generation and global supply chains and knowledge. And that's one of the reasons for looking at this topic, which is very fascinating. Maybe before I ask Nicola, I could just read out this this chat message from Markus Witthaut, who wanted to add he's from the one of the Fraunhofer Institutes in Germany. And he said, I'd like to add that in Germany, a substantial number of patents are filed by research institutions such as Fraunhofer or Max Planck institutions, and these institutes very often collaborate with universities. And I suppose one of the questions is this in your data included or not? But before we go into the discussion, may I ask Nicola Brandt from the OECD to share her insights with us?
Sure, but I would like to know the answer, Alexandra. Are the research institutes Fraunhofer and Max Planck, is that included because you say HEI, right? Higher education institutions. So do you also identify this type of research institutes in your data set?
So we identify all the units that are present in European Register of Higher Education Institutions. So these are over 3,000 mostly academic institutions. Max Planck, I'll need to check in the data. I can do it. Yes, so I'll give you an answer once I check that.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I didn't bring slides. I'm just going to, deliver my praise and also my questions as I am here. But first of all, I would like really to congratulate Alexandra and colleagues on fantastic and I think important work in order to understand the knowledge value creation chain in some ways, and also possibilities to link that later to global value chains. So I'm going to talk about what I think the contribution is, a little bit also what can be done with this data set, and then have a little bit of a critique of the paper, which is a little bit presentational, but also mainly is meant to lead us to some questions when we discuss the subject. So what is the contribution? It's mainly a really big and important data set creation exercise. So Alexandra and colleagues use patent data from EPO, which do not uniquely identify universities or higher education institutes that may be involved in the patenting or in the patent application or the later granting. And they then match that with Alexander just said it, the European Register of Higher Education Institutions, ITER, through a complicated process. So it's not easy, and much of the paper covers the matching process in order to be able to uniquely identify the university, higher education institution that was involved in patenting. And some researchers have done that before, Caviggioli, but on a smaller scale for European universities, and a former colleague of mine, Maria Grazia Squicciarini, for the United States. But this seems to be the most comprehensive data set doing this for European higher education institutions. And also importantly, I think for our times, and for modern times now, it does identify AI patents. So much work can be done with that. So it's basically a fantastic basis for researchers to ask their questions about the knowledge creation process. Why is it important to uniquely identify the universities involved in patenting activities? Well, Alexander already showed it's important to show, well, which universities do patent and which don't. And of course, if you can match this patent data to university specific data, you can better understand, one, the knowledge creation process. So you can look at, well, funding levels, staffing levels, what's the surrounding possible ecosystem? Is it important that industry is around, is close to the university in order for it, the higher education institute, in order for it to patent? And also very importantly, I think for the global supply chain work then later, and for Europe and its position in global innovation, you can research in much more detail than you could before the impact of university higher education patenting activity. Does it lead to startups? How does this type of innovation influence local, regional, or even national productivity? So it's really a fantastic basis for further research, and I do want to congratulate you on this. But I also want to raise some questions and have a little bit of a critique on the paper. I think what it could have done, what I haven't really seen, is because the matching process really isn't easy. I was missing a little bit more of a discussion of what limitations might be. Do we really identify the university correctly? Also, are there opportunities in there? So would we really like to have a patenting database, but also other data on knowledge creation in universities that are uniquely identified in order to ask these questions? What I was also missing a little bit was more of a discussion how this work builds on prior research. I mean, it's somewhere in the paper, but it's not at the beginning. So saying, okay, there are these researchers who've done a similar thing, but we went beyond it. It's more comprehensive. We can do more with it than those researchers were able to do. Also, perhaps going away from the data, the specific data, just discussing a little bit, because you said, Alexander, there's a lot of research about local innovation ecosystems. It would have been nice also to have there in the paper discussion, okay, what's the state of research and how can the specific data set, which required a lot of effort to create, how can it take the questions that have been answered there a little bit further? And finally, I think in order to get insights, well, what it all means for Europe, it would be great to know, is there similar research for other big competing regions, the United States, China, etc. So at some point in the paper, Alexander, you said you were worried about the clustering, but perhaps that happens everywhere. Perhaps that's something that is just a feature of the knowledge creation process that we, well, not so clear whether we do have to worry about it or not. Yeah, I think with that, you know, these just, you know, just wanted to give more, you know, would have liked to get some more information there. perhaps also a wish list. I mean, you have it a little bit. Well, now with this data set, researchers can answer this or that question, but it would be nice if over time you developed a little bit of a research program. So now we're going to use this data to answer this question or this other question. We can do it, but it has limitations. And then we'll take it further. I think there are a lot of potential in this. It's really great work. So thank you for it. And I'm looking forward to see what you're going to do with this kind of data. Thank you very much for the opportunity to see the research, to comment on it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the further discussion.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for these insightful comments. Alexandra, do you want to reply immediately to some of them? Or?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much for the comments. Okay, so maybe I'll start the question about the Max Planck Institute. So I haven't had a chance to look at the data now, but I will check it, yes, and I come back to you with this answer. But even if it's not Max Planck Institute in our data set, if it collaborates with some university and they file a patent in which the name of this university appears as a patent applicant, then we have it in the data. So we do cover patents that are done jointly by research institutions and academic institutions. Okay? In terms of limitations, yes, of course, we know it's not a perfect database. As you said, it required lots of work, but we are aware of the limitations. I think the biggest one is the fact that we cannot capture so-called indirect academic patents. So those patents that are officially registered in the patent offices with the name of the inventor. Okay, and of course, this inventor can be a professor or researcher from academic institutions. In some European countries, there have been some particular rules, so-called professor's privilege. So people that were involved in the creation of patents in the application process, they could apply for a patent under their own name. And this, of course, limits the coverage of our database. So we are aware of it. And so in general, the numbers that we are showing can be underestimated. Okay, so there's more research that leads to patents that originate in academic institutions. Yes, and I'm aware of the weaknesses of the working paper and all the aspects you've mentioned. So how our research links to other research on patenting activities, and of course we build upon the findings of other people. In terms of similar research on other countries, so we've really researched a lot on what's going on in the US. And surprisingly, there's not that much evidence on this topic. What we are trying to do now is to apply a similar procedure to recover academic patents from the US. It is a bit more complicated because in the US they have lots of technology transfer offices, and patents are registered under the name of these TTOs. So we'll see what we'll get from the data. But of course, also in the US, they have extreme concentration. Okay, so there are top universities that research a lot, they patent a lot, and then lots of universities that don't do it at all. So it's not only a European feature; it's also in the US. About China, I don't know. So we'll need to think about it. I think clustering is in general a typical feature of the patenting activity. Okay? Thank you.
If I can just add one sentence, Alexandra, it's not about, when I was talking about weaknesses of the paper, it's actually not weaknesses. It's, I think what you're doing is you're hiding your strength. You're not fully showing what can be done with this database. So that's, just to say, it's applause mainly.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alexandra. We have a few minutes for questions, comments. And while you might time to raise your hand, I have one question that relates a bit to this discussion on the US and China, but different view or a different point. So, I mean, you showed very early on that the European patenting, well, other way around. So the top patenters are in the US and in China, and very few of the top ones are in Europe. Now, given the current situation and the next 4 years we have ahead of us, and who knows what happens in China, is that something to worry about? Do you think? I know this goes well beyond your paper, but maybe having worked with this, maybe you have a view on this. Is this another thing that Europe needs to worry about, and where it's highly dependent on these two regions, or is that just a fact and we just live with it?
I think yes, we should we should worry, and I think that Europe is aware of it, and it is reflected in the reports, for instance, that were published recently. There's also a very nice report on university patenting recently published by European Patent Office, and this issue is raised there. Yes, that Europe is losing ground in terms of research effectiveness and also in patenting activity. China is very strong. So yes, so we should look at what's going on there and also be aware of it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Roberta has raised her hand, so please.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I have a curiosity, and that is the following. How do you think that this type of innovative structure that we have in Europe affects or will affect in the future these trade relationships that we have? So how do you link the JBC's phenomenon with this type of knowledge creation structure that we have? I was curious about that, which is, I think you thought about, but you did not mention about. Thank you.
Yeah, so actually there are ways of linking this information with GBC information and the data on trade. For instance, we can use the concordances between technological fields that are typical for the patents with product level data, so for the trade data. And such research exists. Yes, there's some research on it. So if we treat patents as a source of information on new knowledge, we can also trace whether this new knowledge is kind of reflected in trade flows, in trade statistics. Okay, so for instance, whether countries that generate new knowledge in specific technological fields, whether they also trade goods that embed this technological field. In our data set, we can also analyze patents by technological fields. We have such an information. In particular, we have the information on AI-related patents. So there's also work that can be done. Yeah? So answering your question, I think we can use this information to match it with the trade data and also GBC data that to a large extent is based on trade statistics. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Alexandra. Just looking around. Any other questions? Doesn't look like it. I don't see anyone raising their hand. Okay, then we're perfectly on time. Thanks, Alexandra. Thanks, Nicola, for your presentations and the discussion. And we'll move on to the next presentation, and that's about corporate social due diligence. We'll have Markus Without giving a short presentation, and then David Piker of Wirtschaft and Menschenrechte giving his view on it. Okay, over to you, Markus.
Thanks, Holger, for the introduction. Thank you to the projects for having me. I'll just share my screen so you can see what I will present. It's about the experience in the field of sustainability and corporate social responsibility. we had in our research in the ReShape project on policies and strategies. So what are companies are doing? What are the policies in place right now from a European perspective? I start this session, and then David Püker will take over. So background is social, environmental, and climate-related due diligence policies are in the discussion at least the last 15 years, coming from the United Nations Development Goals. We had a lot of laws in respect to human rights related and ecological related topics in the supply chains. Here you see some of this. So this illustration starts with the guidelines for multinational enterprises, and that was in the beginning based on a voluntary approach by companies, and we did make some progress, but in the end that wasn't enough. Not everybody joined, so policies and laws emerged in different companies. So one important is 10 years ago with the CSR directive, and in Germany we have the Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz, a nice long German name. So Supply Chain Act, you might call it. And I will report about this, what's the policy, what are the experience so far. As mentioned, that was, we tried for quite some time to do it on a voluntary basis. And many companies joined, but some didn't. So that would put into a law, making companies in Germany responsible for upholding human rights in supply chains. So some scandals, especially in certain industry like textile, that triggered this discussion, and it's a political discussion. It's an objective we want to have it in our society. So that's human rights and also ecological concerns. So not only in Germany but all over Europe, seeing okay, we enforce it here, but company then outsource activities and pollution is done elsewhere, doesn't help. The German Supply Chain Act came into force in the beginning of 2023 for large companies, and this year is for smaller companies with 1,000 employees, regardless of their legal form. And the head office, main branches, and if they are registered in Germany, they fall under this law. And yeah, the Supply Chain Act is a quite short law, stating the objectives and which companies are covered by the law. Making statements that companies have to declare principles in respect to social due diligence. They have to implement some kind of risk management, risk analysis, and countermeasurements, management of complaints, documentation and reporting. And that came into force this year when the first larger companies published their reports in May, June. And of course, the law describes possibilities for non-compliance, like fines, but maybe more important, to be put on a blacklist for some time for public contracts. If we look at how is the point of view of companies on that, there's a study done by Handelsblatt Research Institute on behalf of credit firms, so rating company, that has been published. And you can see here clearly a company said, okay, social and or ecological sustainability is important. We are compliant with this. Some said, okay, it's partly important, or others said, oh, this is not our topic. So that, I think, perfectly reflects the motivation for the law as well. And the experience with this Lieferkettengesetz so far is companies don't like it in its current form. So there are some that say, okay, this kind of policy, we don't want to have it at all, but this is a minority. Many say it's too bureaucratic. And our research shows this. If we, when we get a feedback on that, it's not only the big companies that have to do the reporting, because it's on supply chain issues. So big companies must make sure that their first-tier suppliers are compliant in respect to human rights. And so they shift over some of the reporting burden and management practices to their suppliers. And what's alarming is that this leads to higher costs. Companies, even smaller companies, have to hire additional administrative tasks to perform the risk management, to perform the reporting. On the other hand, the agency, the German agency BAFA, which is responsible for sanctions and also for the Supply Chain Act, has just started to look into the results there. To my knowledge, so far, there have not been imposed any sanctions. That might come. It's too early to say. And there is also a fear that this is some kind of distortion of competition. So companies are not against this, but they wish to have it more unified, at least on a European level, and put into force at the same time. So to be the forerunner on that is a disadvantage from an economical perspective. And concluding remarks, and then I'll hand over to David. They will have, these regulations will have a growing impact. There are many others in place: Deforestation Act, CBAM, and so on. You have to take into account, we are talking about supply chains, and companies will transfer tasks to their suppliers. And that affects also small and medium-sized companies. So having their procedures, which are less bureaucratic, unified, so you don't have to do the same topic 20, 30 times in different form again, would really be highly advised and wished by the companies. We should refrain from national solutions, and instead we should go for European-wide standards and processes. Okay, so these are the remarks from me on that issue, what we have done here in respect to policies and within the context of the ReShape project. I think we will have the question at the end. So I would hand over to David, please.
Yes, thank you, Markus. So I would suggest you just keep the presentation slides shared, and I just say next slide. Thank you very much for your nice introductory remarks and this good overview, I think, over the German Supply Chain Act. And I also want to take the opportunity to say thank you for this invitation and the opportunity to talk to you. After listening to the first blocks of presentation, I should mention here that I myself, I do not work in the scientific field, even though I have a background in nature science. My work and the work of the Help Desk Business and Human Rights mainly focuses on counseling. So we actually talk to companies and accompany them implementing due diligence processes, human rights and environmental due diligence processes across their supply chains. So in the following 15 to 20 minutes, I would like to briefly familiarize you a little bit further with the key elements of the human rights due diligence process under the German Supply Chain Act and give you some insights of the Help Desk practical experience with the implementation of the law. Next slide, please. So yeah, but first, a few words about us, the Help Desk Business and Human Rights. Who are we? We are an information and advisory service funded by the federal German government, by the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, so we have been supporting companies since 2017 in implementing human rights and environmental due diligence across their supply chain. So in this context, we also inform companies about relevant regulatory frameworks, such as the German Supply Chain Act, which I'm going to talk about in a few minutes, but also the newly adopted, this summer adopted Corporate Due Diligence Directive, the European Directive, CSDDD, CSRD on sustainability reporting, and Markus has already mentioned it, the deforestation regulation, EUDR. Next slide, please. Our service portfolio mainly includes confidential, free of charge counseling for companies of all sizes and industries, regardless actually of their legal obligations. So there are a lot of SME companies that, for example, especially SMEs do not fall under the German Supply Chain Act. And I would say the vast majority of companies that approach us are SMEs. As part of customers' trainings, that would be the second pillar of our portfolio, service portfolio. We provide companies with hands-on introductions to implementing human rights and environmental due diligence. So that's actually something we like to do in presence. So we actually spend 1 or 2 days with the companies and have a deep dive into human rights due diligence. The third pillar would be our events, such as webinars, lectures, and roundtables, where we bring together representatives from politics, civil society, science, of course, and businesses to discuss certain human rights and environmental related subjects. And last but not least, we provide companies with a range of free online tools, such as the SME Compass, which is a tool specifically for SMEs to guide them through the due diligence process. Or, for example, the CSR risk check, which is a tool that is supposed to help companies on identifying human rights and environmental risks. So it's basically eligible to do a first mapping of potential risks in their supply chains. Next slide, please. So what now does the LKSG, which is the abbreviation for the German name, so the German Supply Chain Act, entail? The German Supply Chain Act requires companies to establish an appropriate and effective risk management system in order to identify and address human rights and environmental risk in their business, in their own business, and in their supply chain. The risk management system that you can see here in the left side box is based on the following core elements. It's about the strategic implementation of an actual risk management system. For this, they can also build up on existing structures, like, for example, an already existing environmental management system. They have to perform a risk analysis, which is actually the core of the due diligence process, because all the other obligations build up on the risk analysis. Taking action by preventive and remedial measures to address the identified risks and violations in the supply chain. They have to establish a complaint procedure to make it possible for potentially affected individuals to raise their grievance, their complaints, in case of risk or violations. And last but not least, the effectiveness assessment and reporting. So it's not only about taking actions, but also evaluating if the actions and the measures that were adopted are actually effective in the sense of human rights due diligence. So the overall goal is that companies respect human rights and the environment in their own business and the supply chain. Next slide. So here are, this is basically like the core the core information on the key points of the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. The scope of the law. What is the scope of the law? Since 2024, companies with at least 1,000 employees in Germany, including temporary workers, fall under the Supply Chain Act. In terms of the material scope of the due diligence obligations, those apply for specific human rights and environmental obligations, which are listed actually in the annex of the law, which mainly includes human rights and labor-related obligations based on the ILO conventions and also some environmental conventions. The due diligence obligations must within the company's own operations as well as with direct suppliers. So this is actually a quite particularity of the German Supply Chain Act, that there is a sort of focus on direct suppliers. But this will be different in the European directive. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. For indirect suppliers, due diligence obligations apply in cases of so-called substantiated knowledge. Substantiated knowledge means that actual indications that suggest that a human rights violation is likely must be given. For example, if there is an affiliation of a indirect supplier with an industry that is associated with specific human rights and environmental risks, so-called high-risk sectors. I think one of the previous referees talked about the textile sector, which would be one of those high-risk sectors. Important, companies primarily have the duty of effort, not a duty of guarantee, to eliminate human rights-related risks. So they have to prove that they implemented their due diligence system based on best efforts. Existing liability regulations do not change, and control and sanctions, Markus already mentioned that, will be carried out by the BAFA, which is the competent authority responsible for the German Supply Chain Act. So next slide. So as I already mentioned, different human rights are covered by this legislations, and those rights do not only include child labor, for example, or the most severe forms of forced labor and slavery. Those two aspects are mainly covered also when, for example, you look in the newspaper or media about the Supply Chain Act. Also, other topics like freedom of association, occupational health and safety, environmental safety, working hours, living wages, and land rights are also covered by this legislation. Next slide. Human rights. It's important to mention that human rights and environmental risks are usually not equally distributed across sectors and supply chains. So this is one of the first steps that is, or the first thing that are important to understand for companies. Specific sectors such as the textile sector, or also, for instance, the cotton industries or chemical pharmaceutical industries, bear higher risk of human rights violations than others. And also in terms of value chains, human rights related to supply chain tier, usually the highest risk occur in the deep tier supply chain, where the primary production, the production of raw materials takes place. And here are some examples. For on the left side, this is a photo of cotton harvesting, which is mainly and usually associated with heavy use of pesticides, which are particularly dangerous for especially women and children, which are actually the main group of affected individuals working in that sector. The next slide, please. So companies in scope are required to exercise due diligence within their business operations and supply chains. To fulfill their obligations, they rely on cooperation with their suppliers, because obviously there is a information demand. So de facto, they are expected to participate, the suppliers, they are expected to participate in the risk analysis, but also in the development of preventive measures or in complaint management. But it's important to mention here that SMEs do not have any obligations under the Supply Chain Act, neither the obligation to cooperate with their customers, nor is there a risk of being sanctioned by the BAFA. So, and also on the side of companies that fall under the scope, they must not pass their obligations on to the supplier. This is unfortunately, and I think, Markus, you also touched upon this, something that we observe in reality. So this actually happens, that bigger companies pass their responsibility and their obligations onto their suppliers, which is actually not in the sense of this law, and the BAFA has clarified that many times. Next slide, please. So from the perspective of direct and indirect suppliers, who are often SMEs, this need to cooperate, this need on the side of bigger companies usually manifests in the form of, for example, customer inquiries, questionnaires, supplier declarations, contractual assurances, and general information requests. So what they experience is actually that their customers, they have certain expectations to them regarding human rights and the environment. They add new contractual clauses in their contracts that ask the suppliers for commitment to human rights and environmental protection. I already mentioned the questionnaires. Effectiveness monitoring means that bigger companies, they approach their suppliers because they want to conduct internal reviews or independent audits to make sure that no human rights and environmental standards are violated. but also they are asked to collaborate in order to implement preventive and remedial measures. Next slide. So what are the challenges for suppliers and particularly SME suppliers? As I said already, there is the need for collaboration to ensure transparent supply chains, but not all information that are always asked and demanded are always required to act effectively in the sense of human rights and environmental due diligence. For example, and this is actually a very close to reality and happens a lot, where big companies ask their first tier suppliers that are located, for example, in Germany, about forced labor and child labor in sectors that are not really risk prone. I remember an example where a German company asked its Swiss supplier about armed conflicts in Switzerland. And this is actually, well, I think it's obvious that those kinds of inquiries and requests, information requests, they do not really serve the purpose to address human rights related risk. So, or another example, caution should be also exercised when contractual assurances, general contractual assurances that include human rights are respected throughout my entire supply chain. Those should be really seen carefully. And the BAFA has clarified many times, as I said, that those general contractual assurances where companies have to prove that everything is fine in their supply chain, they tend to be ineffective as they, on the one side, they overburden suppliers, and also, and that's actually the even worse aspect in this, they incentivize the suppliers to provide inaccurate information about the real situation in their supply chain, because they might not be able to guarantee that everything is fine. So they just say, or they simply don't have knowledge about their deep supply chain, so they just say everything is fine. So for SMEs that do not fall under the LKSG, but are a supplier of a company in scope of the legislation, we recommend if there is the sense that so excuse me, I kind of lost the thread. If there is the feeling and the sense that the requested information is not relevant for them and relevant for identifying a specific risk, we recommend them engage in a dialogue with the supplier and ask for reasons behind the information request. Alternatively, as a non-obliged company not in scope of the legislation, suppliers can also work with a policy statement in which they inform their customers about how they themselves identify risk and take actions within their own operations. Do I still have some time, or is the time up? No, okay. Then maybe then this would be then my okay, then I just briefly have two last slides, and then I'm done, and I will not touch upon the due diligence, the European Due Diligence Directive. So generally speaking, which approaches and measures have proven to be helpful for suppliers, not only in terms of effectiveness, but also concerning lean supply chain management that does not create the feeling of being overwhelmed by customers' inquiries. So first and foremost, suppliers should understand the due diligence obligations of their customers in order also to understand where does the specific information request come from. They should establish formats and contact points of dialogue and cooperation. Ideally, they are prepared for the information request by their customer side. by understanding and identifying relevant human rights and environmental risks in their own supply chain. And this can be managed, for example, by having an own code of conduct, which is based on the supplier's own risk analysis. And if really resources are needed for trainings, certifications, etc., they should also approach their customers and with a request to help and under the consideration that there needs to be a fair cost sharing. Okay, so I'm going to skip the next 3 slides. I mean, this would be like the overall overview of and a little insight of practical experiences from our counseling work. If you like to get more information on our work and follow the regulatory developments, I invite you to follow our LinkedIn website, Helpdesk Wirtschaft und Menschenrechte, Helpdesk Business and Human Rights. And with that, I'm going to close my input. And sorry for the extending the time.
No problem at all. Thanks, thanks, David, and thanks, Markus, for these overviews. It really is an still very hotly debated issue, particularly in Germany and I guess in other European countries as well. Yeah, we have some time for questions related to this presentation. Okay, there is a question just come in on the chat. Let me just try and read through it. So one question from Ms. Yakimo. How is the German and the EU-wide law on supply chains and due diligence affecting the actual ability of companies to undertake due diligence in supply chains in countries such as China, given the risks they face for doing so under the Chinese national laws, counter-espionage? Okay, to what extent can due diligence be enforced in China? I think that's the gist of this. Yeah.
Okay, I start and maybe David can join on that difficult topic. I think most of this law is well intended and they haven't thought about that. So it's still open how to do that. The law says you have to do everything you can do. And if you are not able to find out, okay, there is some kind of forced labor going on with my supplier, and then you might be off the hook. On the other hand, if you have somehow knowledge or some NGO has knowledge that your company is sourcing from this problematic supplier, then you're not. Then you have to take into have to do some actions. And I know there are some topics in the retail sector with Oxfam and Rewe, national groceries retailer, and that didn't come to any kinds of sanctions, but has a negative effect on the reputation of companies. So that's something you have to take into mind as well.
Yeah, thanks, Markus.
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, I can. It is difficult, and especially with respect to the information demand, I would say, because even if you perform due diligence, and as you know, like China is still the most important or one of the most trade partners of Germany. They will rarely get actually direct information on forced labor related issues. So even if they send questionnaires to their suppliers and ask, does forced labor exist in their supply chain, they will probably answer no. It is actually difficult to really specifically identify whether there is a forced labor involved in suppliers' operations. But there are actually some information bases. I mean, everyone knows that forced labor in fact does take place in China. And there are ways of addressing this issue of forced labor without using the term forced labor. What do I mean by that? There are certain circumstances and conditions under which forced labor is more likely or less likely. For example, when it comes to recruiting policies of a company, do they work with governmental agencies that are actually hiring people to work in a specific production site? So this would be actually one of the risk factors. So it's a very complex issue, and I can't talk a lot about it. But what I want to say is that the quality of human rights due diligence, and especially the effectiveness, also partly depends on the quality of those questionnaires. Companies that will ask their suppliers, is there child labor in your supply chain? Is there forced labor in your supply chain? They are more likely not to get the information they need in order to really address the actually existing, the risk or the actually existing violation.
Okay, thanks, David. Yeah, a difficult issue. Rosanna has raised her hand, and then there's another couple of questions on the chat. So, Rosanna, please.
Yes. So thank you very much to all the presenters, to all the speakers. So if I can, I start from this last part of our presentation. And I start from this last sentence. It depends on the question that I am posing to my supplier. So how do you see the improvement to this process of monitoring? Is it more a technological problem? So it's more a problem of investing on digital technologies like blockchain or something like this to monitor the processes? Is it more a matter of training and creating awareness? Is it more a matter of sending or creating new collaboration, supporting the creation of new type of collaboration between buyer and supplier, or also between buyer supplier, facilitated by some third party that help the implementation of this kind of regulation? So all these questions bring back to our main question: what can policy do to implement, to help the implementation of a certain policy? Because also at the European level now we have this new law. It has to be implemented by each country, but then what can the company do, and how can the company be helped to do this?
Should I start, Marcus?
Yes. Yes.
So, well, of course, I cannot answer these questions empirically, but just based on our practical experience. And our impression is that the challenges are on different levels. You talked about data, and data is definitely a big issue, especially the quality of data and also the amount of data. What we observe is that a lot of companies have this approach: the more data, the better. And they totally lose this understanding of what data do I actually need to identify a risk and to take measures to address an identified risk. So that's why, and this has been clarified actually in the European Due Diligence Directive, which is a bit missing in the German Supply Chain Act, that the European directive focuses on this so-called risk-based approach, which means that companies are obliged to look at the part of the supply chain where the highest risks occur, and not just like in the German Supply Chain Act, focusing on the tier 1 supplier, where usually not the highest, it's not the place where the highest risks are localized. So I think it's both. It's the quality of data. It's what I tried to touch upon when I talked about the quality of questionnaires, because questionnaires are actually also a measure to generate data, to get data. So it's the quality of that data, and also the focus of data collection, so to say.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, I would like to add briefly on that. I think there are a few major lessons learned so far. What is needed is some kind of certification, and maybe that should be done by industry associations that have the knowledge of their specific industry. The situation right now with the German Supply Chain Act is that a company has to do this exercise for each of its major customers. And if you have some industry level certification, you would do it once and you are done. That would reduce much of the workload for the suppliers, especially for the SMEs. And doing that process in a digital manner would help as well. So that would be some key lessons that we can take right now.
But maybe one sentence on that. I agree to what Markus said, but always have in mind that certifications have their limitations, and they will not be the holy grail. And what will not happen is that a company has one certification that will basically prove that the supply chain is clean. So it needs to, the informational base needs to be broader than just one certification. It can definitely contribute to a due diligence system, but only be one element of it.
Klaus Friesenbichler has his hand up. Please, Klaus.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to mention, first of all, thanks a lot for the great debate in here. We've done a lot of work on those regulations ourselves, and we fully concur with what is being said. I just wanted to add a few things. In terms of the information availability, certainly that is a big issue. China doesn't really play along these days. So I've heard that, I don't know whether that is true or not, but informing Western companies about internal processes is now regarded as industrial espionage. And this could pose a significant challenge to any of such regulations. So on the research side, what we have been doing within the ReThink project, we have been running surveys, and we also ask firms about those regulations. The second wave of those surveys is currently being fielded, so we will hopefully come out with our first results next year. At some stage, well, I would say second, third quarter or so, yet to be announced. And also now putting a different hat on, we have in the Supply Chain Intelligence Institute Austria, where we collaborate with big data people, we have constructed a synthetic network in which we address the data shortcomings. And so here we draw some policy conclusions, also inform policymakers. And in addition, we also come up with a couple of risk profiles along the value chain. I'm going to post a link into the chat. The current data that we've published is a little bit technical. There is another version, but that is not yet published. Yeah. Anyhow, so the major takeaways are there, and we're also in line with Markus. So we also suggest a certification system and a blacklisting as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Klaus. There was another question in the chat, but Markus has already answered it in the chat, so I think that we should be fine. Any more questions, comments, discussion? Yeah, Rosanna has put her hand up.
Sorry, I have a question for the presentation from ReThink. So it is a curiosity. So you are focused on the patents and so the innovation made by research centers, no? So I was wondering about the patents, if you plan to do also for the patents from companies and because since we are talking mainly about industrial processes or supply chains, no? So I would expect to check also, no, what the companies are doing to innovate their processes. So just this.
Okay, so we have focused on the higher education sector, and partly we are also covering patents done by firms because we analyze also patents that are filed jointly, yes, by universities and firms. We do not have in mind to create a similar data set only on patents from companies, because such data sets exist. Yes, also maybe not for the whole Europe, but at least for some of the countries, the biggest firms. There have been attempts to merge patent data with firm level characteristics, for instance, from Amadeus or Orbis database. So we do not want to replicate things that have already been at least partially done. Thank you.
Thank you.
And maybe I can add to this, Rosanna, that as another part of the project, we also look at patenting done by firms and others, so not just looking into higher education, universities, and we've used that information to construct an input-output table in knowledge flows, if you will. Looking at supply chains in patenting in the sense of where is it cited, who cites it, who uses the patent. So similar to what we have in supply chains in goods, we have a supply chain, if you will, or an input-output table for patenting.
Okay.
And that's more general. And here, Alexandra just looks very specifically and with at this sector, and there we have a lot more information, or Alexandra has a lot more information. That's very, very useful to see how patenting is done and how knowledge flows happen. Okay.
Before to close, we were thinking to take a picture all together. So for the people that would like to be on the picture, if you can switch on your camera and we take a picture together. And let me thank also our project officer that is connected and participated to our webinar. If there are other questions, we can still we have still 10 minutes, and when you are ready, you can open your camera and